Okay, so that's my program, Women SV. So 14 years, 1,500 survivors. I sound like McDonald's, over a bit, not a billion served, but a lot of women served over the past 14, going on 15 years now. These are all women who are experiencing coercive control. And I will, if you're not real familiar with that term, I will get into it. That's another reason why I'm so excited to be talking to you, because as therapists, you are all committed to healing, protecting, supporting the clients that you work with. And because coercive control and domestic violence are so prevalent in the world, we want to make sure that we know as much about it as possible. On the left side, in the left column, these are just examples of the professions that the women I worked with came from over the last 14 years. And you'll notice a similarity. These are the professions that their partners came from as well. So you really can't tell by looking at somebody whether or not they're a survivor or a victim of the crime of domestic violence. I'll say more about survivor versus victim in a moment. You can't tell by looking because abusers are very good at hiding who they truly are behind closed doors. And especially successful, bright, motivated, ambitious, caring, beautiful women are motivated to not to disclose what's going on behind closed doors. There's an element of shame often involved in it. They're afraid of what will happen if word gets out. They're afraid of what their partner will do if people find out the truth about what's going on. So there's a lot of secrecy on both sides. So these are the services that Women SV offers. After working directly with survivors, meeting individually with them, running support groups for 14 years, I'm now totally focused on education because I realize it's not enough for survivors to be educated about what coercive control looks like. If they're entering systems that aren't familiar with it and are still looking for bruises, blood, broken bones, they're not going to get the service and the help and the protection that they need and deserve. And to that end, one of the things I just finished doing was creating a course on coercive control. It's online. I'm going to go quickly through the highlights today of that course to give you a preview of it. But if you want to dive into it more deeply and have it in your back pocket, share it with survivors so they can take it home and let it guide them through the process of articulating their experience of coercive control, then please feel free to check it out on our website. I'll say more about that in a moment. This picture is from Good Morning America when I was being interviewed about my work. I do believe that we are engaged in God's work here. This is God's work that we're doing. And I know I can say this here safely, that it's the age-old battle between the forces of good and evil. And there are men and sometimes women who are abusive to their partners and even to their children. Nobody's immune to this issue. But there are also people who abuse who are open to learning new ways of being in a relationship, that feel guilty for any harm that they've done, that are willing to do self-reflection. I'm not talking about that set of people today. I am talking about the set that lie at the far end of the bell curve, that don't feel empathy, remorse, self-reflection, don't appear to possess any kind of moral compass. We'll talk more about that as we go forward. But this is a totally different set of people that I'm talking about that you don't take to couples counseling, that you don't do individual therapy with, because they're all about winning and manipulation. So focus of my program now, education. In real estate, they say location, location, location. I say education, education, education. That's the key to prevention because the more you know about early warning signs to look for, the safer you'll be and the sooner you can get out before there's too much at stake. If you go on to my website, womensv.org, if you want to go through the course online, it's a 90-minute course. There is a cost generally for people who can afford it because it takes money to run the program. And you can imagine doing this work, there's a lot of people that don't want to see this program succeed. And they're working for the other side. So this is, if you want to look at just a 15-minute version of what I'm going to talk to you about today, of understanding and documenting coercive control, the 15-minute free version. Okay, so I may share some stories with you as you go along. I know that you're used to trigger warnings because you give them and have heard them throughout your own training and your work. But I do want to advise you that many people go into this field because there has been trauma in their own lives. I know from my close friends and even therapists that I've worked with, and I'm as healthy as I am today because of all the therapy I've gotten through my years. But I do know that many therapists have suffered their own trauma. And some of what I talk about today may be triggering for you. So please don't be shy about clicking off, or, it's easy to do when you're in a Zoom room to take a break if you need to as we go along, please. Some caveats and qualifiers. I'll say he for perpetrator and she for survivor. And that's because about 90% of victims of domestic violence are female. And even the remaining percent who are male are typically victims at the hands of another male. But that's not to say that, as I said before, that women can't be perpetrators. They can, as spouses, as partners, and even as mothers. But the vast majority of perpetrators of domestic violence are male, and the vast majority of victims of domestic violence are female. So please adjust the pronouns if you're working with a particular population, or in your particular case, adjust the pronouns as you see fit. And I do want to let you know that I work with, over the past 14 years, I've worked with women from all over the world, many different races, many different religions, many different cultures. And what was so wonderful is we'd get together back in the old days when we met in our support group in person, and we looked like a United Nations meeting. But what united all the sisters as survivors was the fact that they'd been involved with a partner who was powerful, sophisticated, controlling, and very good at hiding who they were behind closed doors. You may hear me use the term victim, and I don't mean victim mentality. I mean crime victim, because domestic violence is a crime. In some states, like the enlightened state of Hawaii, it's acknowledged as a crime. Other states talk about it in family court, and that's the case in California. But my perception is it should be viewed as a crime. So I'll talk about victims, just as you talk about a robbery victim. And the other reason for that is not all of them survive. Statistics, disturbing statistics from the World Health Organization. 1 in 3 women across the planet will be raped or severely beaten during her lifetime. 1 in 3. From the European Union, the European Institute for Gender Equality, 1 in 2 women will experience psychological violence. So you know that in your practice, you're going to come across clients that are dealing with, if not physical and sexual violence, emotional, psychological abuse, which is violence. Emotional abuse is physical abuse because it impacts your nervous system. It affects your blood pressure, your heart, your health. There's something called broken heart syndrome that actually impacts your heart's ability to pump blood through its system properly because of the cortisol rush that it gets. So one of the ladies in our support group was in hospice already when she joined our group. And unfortunately, she ended up dying literally from a broken heart. She had heart and lung disease and no history of it in her family after her husband successfully turned their children against her. You can die from a broken heart. You can get cancer from a broken heart. You can get diabetes, have a stroke. All kinds of horrible physical things can happen to you, not to mention self-medicating with drugs and alcohol and food in response to stress and trauma. So today we're going to think about covert abuse and coercive control and see how we can use that knowledge to support the survivors that we work with. And then by the end, I'll guide you through the process, give you a brief area view of how to help survivors turn that knowledge into a 2 to 3 page summary that they can present to whoever they're seeking help from. And why this is so valuable is because you know what happens to anybody's brain when it's on trauma. Remember those old commercials? This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. This is your brain. This is your brain on trauma. It's called trauma brain, just like people get chemo brain going through chemotherapy when they have cancer. This is like you've got a malignant tumor in your soul. You've been possessed by this demonic force. And I'll tell you, even if the women that I worked with were not religious or spiritual by nature, they would talk about the look that would come into their partner's eyes when he was angry at them. And they would use terms like it was diabolical, it was demonic, it was like his soul had left the building. So imagine living with someone like that. And in the old days, our heart would be pumping, well, we would be pumping cortisol to get that adrenaline rush so we could escape from the lion. But what happens when you're living with the lion? How hard that makes it to organize your thoughts if danger can come from any corner. That's where you come in to help your clients organize their thoughts. You can help be their left brain. Let them borrow your left brain. And this tool is meant to help you do that. When I was here before, I talked about the equality wheel, and a lot of therapists like that, and they've been sharing it with their clients ever since. And so please feel free to share it with your clients because many of them have forgotten what normal looks like. This has become their new normal that they get wakened up at 2 in the morning because her husband, her partner needs to talk, or she's expected to have, dinner at the table and keep it warm for him for 3 hours, or he can be late and show up 3 hours late, but she better not be 5 minutes later. There'll be hell to pay. So, with an equal relationship, there's a feeling of safety. You can be spontaneous, you can be creative, you can be honest, you can share your feelings, your hopes, your dreams, and none of that will be turned against you. There's respect, there's trust, there's accountability. Of course, we're going to say things or do things that we regret later because we're flawed, we're human, we're imperfect. But here's the difference between a regular person and a regular relationship and an abusive one. Flawed, imperfect people, when they are held accountable, will hold themselves accountable and say, I'm sorry, and show by their behavior that they mean to do better and be better. Then we get the abusive people that are not holding themselves accountable, that always project the blame onto other people. And even what they've done to their partner, they'll often accuse their partner of doing to them. Do you know what that's called? DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender. DARVO, so common it has an acronym. Deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender. And you know why they do that? Makes it easier for them to remember their lies. They just remember what they did and change the pronouns and project it onto their partner. That's why they sound so convincing. I tell you, they'll lie. They'll tell you that we're having this meeting now down in Antarctica, and it's midnight, and there's a blizzard, and you'll believe them because they're so convincing. They are consummate salesmen, these guys. But they're also, and some women, and they can also be emotionally abusive. They will try to isolate their partner so she's got no one else to reach out to for support or to get some kind of perspective on what's going on. So she starts to remember what normal looks like. They'll minimize whatever harm they've done to her. She'll tend to minimize it too because she's generally capable of self-reflection and remorse and holding herself accountable. And you see how those very good qualities can be used against her, weaponizing even her very best qualities, along with her vulnerabilities. If she's growing up in an abusive home, she may be looking for a do-over with a partner. Well, maybe this time, yes, he reminds me of my mother, but maybe this time I can make it work. And it doesn't, it almost never works out. It almost always ends up getting worse. She can't fix the unfixable. And that's the problem with so many women who are bright and motivated and ambitious and persevering and agreeable. They think, I've got this. I've solved all these other problems. I can solve the problem in this marriage. And if she has a pastor or a faith leader that she's reaching out to for help, he or she may be encouraging her to work it out and leave no stone unturned in terms of healing the relationship because Jesus hates divorce. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. He may be using financial abuse on her, putting her on an allowance, cutting her off from the joint assets, hiding money overseas, not letting her get a credit card, racking up debt in her name. He may be forcing her to sign things or only showing her the last page of the income tax return, and she has no idea what he's making. That's abuse. Well, the opposite of abuse is we find it right there in the Bible. It's all there in Corinthians. And no matter if somebody is religious or faith-based or not, if you've been to a wedding, you've heard this passage read because it just makes good sense. Love is patient, love is kind. As you go through this list, you'll see that the opposite of those things is abuse. Abusers are impatient, unkind, cruel. They're jealous, they brag, they're all about themselves. They are self-centered. They're easily angered. They're like a simmering volcano. They keep a record of wrongs. They have grievances against you, and they'll bring up things from 6, 8 months ago and rub your nose in it. They enjoy causing. They seem to get satisfaction, a sadistic pleasure out of causing people pain. They delight in lying. They sometimes they do it just to keep in practice, it seems. It's a sport for them. It doesn't protect, it attacks. It's very jealous, very mistrustful. It dashes your hopes, plunges you into despair, and it fails miserably at qualifying as love. Do you see how all you need to know about a normal, healthy relationship is summed up in Corinthians? How about that? How about them apples? Pretty cool, but the opposite. is abuse. And then we get the whole crazy making cycle of now he's nice, now he's not nice, nice, not nice, 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 cruel. And sometimes there's a buildup. They'll often meet in the honeymoon phase. You may have seen this cycle of violence. It's a cycle. It's one pattern. There's many, but this is one pattern where he's nice in the beginning, hearts and flowers, lots of, love bombing, showering her with gifts, attention, affection. And then she may feel some kind of tension or a few snide comments being made, or she might see him cutting somebody off in traffic. There's something happening. These guys are like simmering volcanoes, and you never know what's going to set them off. Some innocent comment she makes, or Susie comes home with a B on a report card, or the stock market goes down. Suddenly it's her fault and he explodes. And then that explosion may be physical, maybe sexual, maybe verbal, maybe financial. He may decide to take her name off the joint accounts. He may call up her boss and say he's worried about her mental health. Attack can come in many ways when it's sneaky. It's not where police and courts are still looking for blood, bruises, and broken bones, in spite of coercive control being proven to be a lethality risk. And stay tuned, I'm going to do a big definition on coercive control in a moment. So we get that cycle of abuse, the honeymoon, tension building, explosion, honeymoon. And sometimes they apologize. More often in more affluent areas, they don't. And that has to do with that whole entitled air they have about them. Look at this wonderful lifestyle I'm letting you live, and I made it all possible. They don't do self-reflection, remember? There's just, oh, he's feeling in a good mood. He got it off his chest. He's feeling better. What's wrong with you? So for them, like picking on somebody, or picking an argument, or putting somebody down, it's like, the equivalent of going to a power gym and working out. They feel much better afterwards. And their partner, of course, feels much worse. And she ends up walking on eggshells and living with fear and shame and living in silence and isolation. So you see how over time, she can begin this downward spiral, further and further down that downward spiral, more and more frequent periods of attack, fewer and fewer periods of peace. She's afraid to reach out, especially if she comes from a country or a culture or a religion where divorce doesn't happen. We don't even talk about that. Or if you do get divorced, you're going to be banished from the rest of the community. We're still living in the 1950s, the equivalent here in the United States, in different parts of the world. And even here in the United States, there are cultures and religions that still frown on divorce. So you're going to meet people that are struggling with the guilt and the shame and the suffering, and so are their children. And meanwhile, the children are growing up at the master's knee because abuse is a learned behavior. But here's the hope. You see that downward spiral? We always have to go back to hope, because that spiral goes down, but the same spiral can go up. So once you realize what's going on, and once you realize it's not your fault, then you could start doing something about it. But first, what you have to do is recognize what's going on. And that's why we have to learn about what coercive control and covert abuse are all about. Now, I serve on the Domestic Violence Death Review team. And every year we put out a report that summarizes and analyzes the homicides that have happened in Santa Clara County. And I was asked for the last few years to submit, the last couple of years, to submit the definition of what coercive control is and a description. And here's the definition and description, but just basically to summarize it for you, it is a pattern of threatening, isolating, controlling behavior. Those elements, you see, I don't have to touch you to do those things. Threaten, isolate, control. It's a lethality risk. Why? Because it dehumanizes your partner and it turns them into an object, a possession, a resource to use and use up. And what's the ultimate right of property possession? Disposal. That's what makes it a lethality risk. And then what happens when they end the relationship? Some women think, oh, he'll forget me, he'll move on, he never treated me like he cared about me anyways. That's their mistake. Because what she does, what she's doing when she tells him she wants a divorce, or when she leaves, escapes, because you don't leave an abuser, you escape, you flee. It's because of the danger. Why? Because you're signaling to him that he's no longer in control of you, that you are taking control back. And often they will do whatever that takes to get that control back, up to and including the reason why I serve on the Domestic Violence Death Review team. Abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, financial, it all tends to escalate over time. It doesn't get better, it tends to get worse. And the average number of times a woman leaves an abusive relationship is like 7 to 12, depending on the statistics you read. But each time you go back to an abuser, it gets harder and harder to leave. And sometimes, if we take a global historical perspective, entire countries can become battered spouses in the grips and in the throes of coercive control. And they try to leave the perpetrator. They escape and eventually end up going back, but it gets harder and harder each time to escape. That's the reason why Evan Stark calls coercive control a liberty crime and a political crime, because it impinges on your fundamental human right to be free and safe in your own home. And it's a reality for people across all socioeconomic spectrums. Don't think because you're dealing with a doctor, a lawyer, a CEO, or a celebrity. I've worked with them all survivors. All of these survivors that I worked with, they came from highly regarded professions. And that added an extra element of shame and feeling of entrapment because they had no idea how to leave without being destroyed by their equally or more powerful partner. So the more we know, the more we can do to help our clients to recognize early warning signs in our own relationships and what to do about it, because nobody is immune. We talked about, well, coercive control. If we look at the late, great Dr. Evan Stark, who I had the privilege of meeting personally, his book, Coercive Control, How Men Entrap Women in Personal Life, that signals the gender-based nature of coercive control. It tends to be a crime perpetrated by men against women, and it has to do with that power imbalance often, like physical superiority often, like heavier, stronger, and not always, but often more money, more power, more influence. But the more money, the more power, the more influence they have, the power and control dynamics are the same. This applies to any socioeconomic bracket that you're dealing with. But the more money, the more power, the more resources, the more privileges you have, the more tools you have to work with, to abuse and get away with it. I call coercive control the ultimate form of identity theft because it robs you of who you were before getting into this relationship, robs you of your freedom, your independence, your financial freedom, your feeling of safety, self-worth, sometimes literally robs you of your life savings, your home, sometimes your children. So they will often go after full custody of the children just to punish you, not because they care about the children. They may have been neglectful or abusive to the children in the past, but suddenly they're Disneyland dad. In some cases, Disneyland mom. And I do want to acknowledge that women can be abusive too. Just check out Mommy Dearest, the movie or the book. But again, in most cases, it's abusive fathers who are pretending to be devoted fathers now that they're going through court and there's custody, support, alimony payments at play here. Because these guys often equate human worth with net worth. And they see life as a zero-sum game. So if my ex is getting more, that means I must be getting less. And that goes for everything, including love and attention. And that's why the abuse often starts after they have children, because suddenly she's spending attention, time, and affection on someone other than him. It's a very skewed way of looking at the world. But once you start to see them, remember that book? If women are from Venus, men are from Mars, these guys are from Pluto. It's not even a real planet. It's way far out there with a whole different set of rules. So here's some examples of what obvious coercive control looks like when spoken. Things like, if you ever leave me, I will hunt you down and kill you, or you'll end up a bag lady, or you better pick up when I call by the second ring. No, you can't have any friends of the opposite sex in your social media. No, you're not going to spend this weekend with your friends. Give me all your passwords. Here, sign this, or I'll cut off your stipend. Like you can get a feeling pretty much that that's abusive, right? That exertion of power over somebody. But here it is in a more subtle form. So here we have a wife. She's working on her computer. Oh, she looks at her emails, and some of them look like they've been read, and she doesn't recall reading them. And then her husband shows up in the doorway, and she goes, "Honey, have you been reading my emails?" And he takes a step back and looks very offended, and he says, "I never touched your computer." That's the truth. But it's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Why do you think they say that in a court of law? It's true that he never touched her computer. He didn't have to. He was grabbing her cell phone and swiping through it while she was in the shower. So watch these guys. They will tell you little bits of the truth, and they will weave truth in with their lies to make the truth more credible. That's why you have to be very discerning, very analytical, and dig beneath the surface. That's why it's an advantage for me. I did a master's in English literature and became an English lit teacher before becoming a domestic violence advocate. And after spending 14 years working with all these women and doing all these trainings for providers, I'm very attuned to subtlety, nuance, context. You've got to be a detective. And when you go out into the night sky, don't just look at these individual dots as individual stars in the sky. See which ones form the constellation. And do some of them form the constellation of the covert abuser? Poof, you can't unsee it then. Oh, she starts to complain about the way he's treating her or something he said to her the other night that embarrassed her when they had friends over to dinner. And he goes, I would never say that. Beware of that use of the conditional tense too. Sometimes they'll flat out lie, but sometimes they'll say, oh, I would never do that. And then he proceeds to rewrite history. And then he starts to be concerned about her mental health. And if she is capable of self-reflection, remember the weaponization of her best qualities, not just her vulnerabilities, but her best qualities. Oh, well, maybe did I mishear him? Did I misinterpret it? Am I overly sensitive? Am I making him walk on eggshells? You see, Darvo. Obvious abuse. And this is what police are looking for. This is what courts are looking for. The fist to the face or the fist to the wall. Show me that punched hole in the wall. Show me the bruises. Oh, did he threaten you with a knife? Is he keeping you up all night? Even that's hard to prove, isn't it? Oh, did he block your exit? Do you have a picture of his car blocking your car from leaving the driveway? Has he hurt your pet or given your pet away or destroyed smashed your cell phone? Has he driven dangerously? Do you have a snapshot, a sneaky picture you took of 90 miles an hour in a 40-mile-an-hour zone? But then there's the more subtle forms of abuse. She has noticed over time. That's why the pattern is very important to establish. And that's why a journal can help. If she's starting to see, oh, I'm noticing there's a pattern emerging here. Whenever I talk about money or resources or ask for an increase in my allowance, he says, oh, yeah, we'll see about that. And then he takes out his gun and starts cleaning it. Am I going to pick up the phone, dial 911, and say, help, my husband just started cleaning his gun? Oh, an officer, you should have seen the look in his eye while he was doing it. Is he going to show up? More likely he's going like officers are going to show up and their time is precious. They are facing immediate life-threatening situations. They may have to make snap decisions. Many of them nowadays, more and more of them are trauma informed, but those that are not are going to say, "Hey, ma'am, call me if something actually happens." And you might want to think about talking to somebody. So watch out for the more subtle forms of abuse. Remember, anything in the hands of an abuser can become a weapon. The survivors I worked with over 14 years told me many stories of their near-death experiences where household items have been turned into weapons. Danger on the staircase, danger with a beach towel being wrapped around a child's throat, screwdriver being thrown at them, or a remote control thrown full force at their head, garbage bag put over their head, face put in a pillow. Yes, a pillow as a potential murder weapon. And we're still looking for guns and knives. Anything in the hands of a covert abuser can become a weapon. And so we talked about people that commit harm against a partner, but who are capable of change. We can call them people who commit harm against a partner. And that's kind of the favorite language of the domestic violence community, a person who harms. But I deal with this specific subset, these people who commit harm over and over again and again. And if she asks for change, points out how he's hurt her, she's just showing him where to insert the sword. So Ellen Pence is the one who gave us a power and control wheel. And she says that there's different types of abusive behavior. There's abusive behavior that happens like situational. He comes home and finds her in bed with another man. There may be violence. Or she's protecting herself because he's got his hands in her throat and she scratches his face. Well, that's violence, but it's resistive violence. But what we're talking about here is antisocial violence. I go into more detail about all these things in my 90-minute course. So do check it out if you want me to slow down and dive into more detail. But what we're concerned about here is that fifth population of abusers, the ones that practice antisocial violence. I call them abusers. covert abusers, and I make no apology for it because that is their MO. And even Ellen Pence says this type of person who engages in this kind of violence is not likely to benefit from a batterers intervention program. But I'll say, aha, Ellen, here's the only time I can ever figure out that you were wrong. And it's this time because they actually do benefit from the batterers intervention programs. They learn how to abuse without getting arrested next time. And most of them are too darn smart to ever get arrested in the first place. But if they do, they're going to find ways to coerce and control and entrap their partner without getting caught, without getting arrested. Why? Because after giving many trainings to many therapists over the past 14 years, whenever I start to describe the cluster of personality traits that the survivors that I work with describe, here's what the therapists give back to me in terms of diagnostic labels. It's not me diagnosing these people. I'm not a therapist. I'm a domestic violence advocate and former teacher, and now a consultant and a trainer. But here's what therapists feed back to me, and I got this dark tetrad. It used to be dark triad until the sadistic element was added, but I learned this from Dr. Reid Meloy, Reidmeloy, forensic psychologist. When you have this cluster, people that have one face in public, another behind closed doors, that's that Machiavellian component, opportunistic, and they look for weaknesses and exploit them. They have the appearance of honesty to better to hide their dishonesty behind closed doors. When they have that psychopathic component where they lie easily and often, even when they don't need to, they like cheap thrills. There's sometimes an element of addiction involved. They're often into porn because they like those cheap thrills, and they lie easily, often even when they don't need to. Lack moral compass. They have to win. They're very good at playing the victim. They seem to lack a conscience. They lack empathy. They lack remorse. They don't hold themselves accountable. They project blame onto others always. And they seem to almost enjoy or get a kick out of causing pain to the people they should be protecting the most. That's that sadistic component. And then, of course, the narcissistic component where it's all about them 24/7. The world has to revolve around them. So what do you do when you've got all four for the price of one? You get all four personalities in one person. Then you get somebody like Bob Bashara. Now, this is an extreme example, but it's extreme to show you where it can lead, and also because I've seen where it can lead serving on the domestic violence death review team. Here's Bob Bashara saying, how could I have killed my wife if I was president of the Rotary Club? You see how even a respectable club like the Rotary Club, my dad was a Rotarian, my dad was a doctor and wonderful man. And the Rotary Club is a wonderful club. It's like dedicated to service. But there will be people that will use wonderful clubs like the Rotary Club as camouflage to hide who they truly are. Because what he ended up doing was paying his hennyman to kill his wife. And so he called himself president of the Rotary Club. But here's what one of the jurors also called him: monster, narcissist, sociopath, master manipulator, arrogant, pathological liar. Sound familiar? How about that, dark tetrad? And then, human worth equals net worth. Here's what Jane's sister said about Bob. Jane supported him and she was committed to him, and she would have done just about anything for Bob except open up her 401k. So, and that's why she thinks he killed her. So what motivates a covert abuser? These things: sex, money, power, winning. And then, so we take all those things that a survivor is up against, and then complex post-traumatic stress disorder caused by living with the lion. And this is what happens to prisoners of war and hostages and women and children in abusive situations. Check out Dr. Judith Herman, the psychiatrist's book, Trauma and Recovery, one of my role models. Here she is saying that the abuser will try to escape accountability for his crimes, and if he can't escape it, and if she starts talking, he's going to try to destroy her credibility. And what's working against her, the survivor in this case, is, as therapist Nancy Marshall said, is a lot of symptoms of PTSD, CPTSD, will mirror those of a mental health disorder. So you have to be able to discern if somebody's being put on a psychiatric hold. Has she been set up by her husband, who happens to be a psychiatrist, or a physician, or a therapist, or somebody that's savvy about undermining the credibility of his partner? Is she actually mentally ill? Is she being stalked or terrorized and have been made to look mentally ill because she's being kept awake and terrorized 24/7? Have hands been put on her throat And has she blacked out or nearly lost consciousness? Or has she been hit in the head maybe one too many times? There's a saying, punch drunk, that happens where women can end up looking kind of scattered, confused, or even drunk or on drugs, and that can impact their credibility. Is there some kind of organic condition going on? And is she also a victim of either physical abuse, sexual abuse, or coercive control? I will tell you flat out across the board, admitting ER physicians and psychiatrists are not getting training on making this differential diagnosis. And without the skills to do this, she's going to end up having the system weaponized against her. That happened to one of my ladies who was carted away when she was still breastfeeding her child, not allowed to take her child with her. So you see how even the system, how systems like medical and behavioral health care are set up to help support and protect survivors can be used to control and further coerce and punish them. So here we have this, imagine a woman standing in the middle of 280 or whatever highway she's on, trucks whizzing by her. And then her attorney says, here, fill this form out. Oh yeah, you want a restraining order? Summarize what happened to you over the last, 20 years, and then we'll think about it. Or the attorney or the judge, if she's self-representing, or maybe she's trying to explain it to herself, or maybe to her pastor. She may have a sympathetic pastor, and that's wonderful. Lucky for her, because more and more pastors are becoming trauma informed. And there's so much less talk about fire and brimstone and more about the New Testament and how Jesus came to bring his message of light and love. And how radical was that? For that, they killed him. He was just saying, can't we all just get along? Can't we treat each other the way we want to be treated? This is love. If you just follow that first commandment, everything else will fall into place. What's wrong with that? Nothing. And yet still they had to crucify him. So you see what Jesus was up against, and you see what women are still up against, and children, and some men even today, with partners who've turned that love is patient, love is kind on its head and rule by force and submission and even weaponizing religion and scripture against them. Now, how does a woman break free from that when inside she's got these voices telling her she's wrong, she's dirty, she's guilty, she must submit? Or she reaches out to a police officer and he's wanting the facts, but she's going all over the place because that's trauma brain. And she hasn't been able to rein in or articulate oh, when I talk about money, my husband cleans his gun. That's not going to go over well. So everything that I'm saying today here, folks, it's meant to guide you in guiding your survivors. I'm talking to you as a trained domestic violence advocate, as a former teacher, as a consultant, but I'm not talking to you as an attorney, and none of this is meant to be legal advice. Okay, so with that as a disclaimer, when you're working with your clients, make sure you establish safety first. Are you in a safe place? If you're doing a Zoom call, watch out for having a background like I've got in the background. Do you know if anybody's here? I'll tell you, nobody's here. You can take my word for it. But what if you're talking to a survivor? And what if suddenly her partner shows up in the background? You want to make sure that there's no background, virtual background there. It's much better to meet in person. Put the technology away, maybe go back to the old-fashioned method of, pen and paper and notebook, because anything that's stored on computer goes up to the cloud, and even if she deletes it on her computer, it can still be up in the cloud. So she might want to keep her notes on a computer at work if she's working, or over at a friend's house, or a hard copy somewhere safe. There was one survivor who was still in the relationship with her partner, had become completely isolated. She'd been an artist in the course of before she got married. And her husband was a chemist. And so she kept her notes in a workbook on art sketches. And she thought that will be the last place he'll ever think to look. Hiding in plain sight, if that's the only alternative. And yes, after establishing safety, make sure part of what you set up in the office always have boxes of tissues, because it will be triggering for your survivor and it may be triggering for you as well. And really suggest that she have a box to keep whatever evidence she has in, and also in a safe place. And self-care for both you and the person that you are working with, the client. So important for you, because you're going to take her through hell, remembering the worst moments of her life. And she's already been living in hell with the devil as her escort. And now you are going to be that escort. So make sure you consider starting with prayer. Put that hedge of protection around you. I do it every day. I talk to God all day long. And good thing we have cell phones and earbuds now, because sometimes I talk out loud. In the old days, they'd cart me away, but Now it's me talking to Archangel Michael and just knowing that the good angels, the good Lord Jesus, I've got a whole team working for me 24/7, and that's why I'm alive today, because there are forces of darkness. I tell you folks, there are forces of darkness that have been after me for 14 years, and that's why I don't share with anybody where I live. And there are still people that stalk me and are wanting to shut down my program. But how am I still here? Because of the good Lord. I give all credit and glory to God and Jesus for keeping me alive. So, after maybe starting with a little prayer to create that safe space for your client, trigger warning about what you're about to talk about for your survivor, because she may not want to, she won't want to remember those memories. Remember Barbara Streisand? Memories may be beautiful and yet those too painful to remember. What do? We quickly choose to forget. Little snippets will come out and they will pop like bubbles. So that's when she needs a little journal to write them down, because the mind can be fickle. It'll want to protect you. And that's where minimization and denial come in. So that's when, after you establish all that, that's when you go through the steps, choose audience and goal. The most important thing was knowing what all this looks like, how to recognize it, how to identify in your client if she's experiencing it, all the steps to go through. What is her goal? Does you want to explain to her pastor why she's feeling guilty about wanting to leave her partner? Then here's some background that you might want to refer to, that it becomes spiritual abuse when you forbid somebody to practice their faith. And it's contrary to biblical principles. Look at Ephesians. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. Husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. You see, it's right there in Luke, in Colossians, in John. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Like, if she needs scripture, you got scripture. And here's a Christian therapist, Dr. Henry Cloud, talking about wise, foolish, and evil people. The wise and foolish people, that's us. Okay? We can be foolish sometimes. Hopefully, we're wise most of the time. But once we're evil, watch out for that. And he says, I differ a little bit with them. We all have a little bit of evil. Yeah, he's talking about sin and we're imperfect and we're flawed, but in our heart we're good, in our heart we're saved, in our heart we're forgiven. But when you have people that are working for the other side, that's when you want to run, when you're coming up against that, brushing up against evil. So these are the steps, the timeline, the incident and allegation log, which I put together to help people summarize their experiences. Family Code 6320, I lay it all out in my course. Power and Control Wheel, that's the law, the legislation in California. Family Code 6320 gives you grounds for a restraining order in family court, which, if violated, could become a criminal case. And then the danger assessment, which is part of the picture to get at obvious forms of abuse, the web scale to get at less obvious forms of abuse, and then the executive summary that will come out of all of that. So it's like a funnel. You start with the big picture, with everything, get everything down, one big data dump. What happened? When did it happen? What kind of abuse is it? Emotional, financial, legal, technological? This is what that incident and allegation log would look like. And there's lots of different types of abuse. But you want to pull from that the highlights, 5 or 6 examples, and then from those highlights, the examples that stick out to her, that's when you want to summarize them in 2 to 3 pages, and she'll be able to do that after working with you and working through that through the whole process. And if you want to see the 15-minute more in-depth version that really goes into detail here, I've set it up for you, laid the table, and then you can just go to the website to look at the free 15-minute version or dive deeper into the 90-minute version. But when you're finished, do the self-care reminder with your survivors and with yourself. Look for ways to look after yourself and encourage your survivors. It's the last thing they ever think of, to look after themselves. They're always looking after their kids, their husband, their job, whatever the tasks around the house, whatever needs to be done. And they've been taught that any time they spend on themselves, they're being selfish. So please close also with a prayer if you can. Bring them back into the center, into the safe space. Remind them that God exists. God has your back. God is watching over you. And no matter how dark that apparent valley of the shadow of death that she may be in, God is watching over her and will lead her out and through the other side. There is hope. There is healing. There is healing after trauma, and she can get there. So please take a look at my website, at the course on there, if you want more detail. And thank you so much, everybody.
Ruth, thank you so much. This was such a wealth of information. There was a question on here. One question was, when there are no bruises or obvious signs, what's one really good question you recommend we ask to help someone start recognizing those less visible patterns of control?
Oh my gosh, that is a fabulous question. There's something called the web scale, and she can start with the question. I won't share my screen because we're running out of time, but the web scale, start with the question, are you ever afraid? Is there any moment in your conversations with your partner or after a conversation where you're feeling unsettled, unsure, starting to doubt yourself, feeling afraid? Are you starting to feel like you're walking on eggshells? Are you starting to edit what you say before you say it? Are you noticing that you're feeling ashamed ever, or are you constantly being corrected? Are you starting to feel like there's nothing you can ever do that's right? Do you have to put the sponge at a 45-degree angle to the splashboard of the kitchen, or you're going to get a 5-page document on how to do the dishes properly? So start with, do you ever feel afraid? You can live with a controlling partner who's annoying, but you can live with a controlling partner who's dangerous. And that's another level of discernment. Is this guy some jerk, or is she just a nag? And is it just time to call it quits? No, and you can leave and you get angry with one another. But if you are with somebody that has to control everything, coercive control, do you ever feel coerced? Forced to do something you don't want to do. Remember, human trafficking has elements of force, fraud, and coercion. Force, fraud, and coercion. So does coercive control. Do you ever feel trapped, isolated, afraid, coerced, controlled? Has he ever tricked you into signing something? I've got 1,000 questions to ask, but start with, are you ever afraid? Do you ever feel humiliated, ashamed, threatened, isolated, controlled, or trapped?
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I do have a wrap-up question. Ruth, my question to you is, if I have a client that looks like there might be some coercive control happening, I ask those questions. I'm assuming it would probably be really good. The next step would be asking them to go on your website and look at coercive control, because one thing I'm really hearing you say is educate, 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 help not only us therapists to be trauma informed, but help guide our clients in being trauma informed so they see the resources out there, even going into your program of being able to really build up and empower themselves in knowing that there are some options, because as you have already shared, they have a tendency to feel like they have no options, especially when there's a higher level of privilege, financial, and then they don't maybe even are even working, right? And so those kinds of things. Is there anything else I'm missing that you would recommend?
That's so beautifully said. Thank you so much. You may even find that some of the survivors you're working with are struggling with suicidal ideation, and that may be an organic condition that's going on, but is it because they're feeling so trapped and isolated with no way out? And that's why our website is all about offering hope and resources so women survivors can start to plan a strategic exit over time if they want, if we never pressure or tell anybody to leave, but if they are wanting to. These are resources they can reach out to on our website. You'll see when you go on www.womensv.org, it's Women of Silicon Valley, but we've helped women all over the country and some places, different parts of the world, deal with coercive control. But if they go on our website, womensv.org, look under resources and directory of resources, and then you'll see all kinds of Santa Clara County resources here for the YWCA's support network, ACI, Asian Americans for Community Involvement, Community Solutions to Domestic Violence, Next Door Solutions to Domestic Violence, Maitri, Shalom Bayit, Narika. I need to add Narika onto there. So if you're from South Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, all over, no matter where you come from in the world, you'll find resources in the Bay Area. That's the fabulous thing about it. And support groups, even online, some of them, and CORA, Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse in the San Mateo County, other agencies that offer support. So there's all kinds of resources on the website, and then that will lead you to other websites. So just educate, 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 and know that the brain can heal. And that's the good news. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video, subscribe, and click the link in the video description to donate if you can to help support the work of this program. For more information and resources, you can visit us at womensv.org.